The moment his paddle connected with that neon yellow ball, sending it spinning past my right shoulder at impossible speed, I knew my carefully reconstructed life in Florida was about to shatter into something I never saw coming. I stood there on that sun-baked pickleball court, my new Wilson paddle hanging uselessly at my side, watching this tall stranger with silver hair and shoulders that still remembered their military bearing walk around the net toward me, with an apologetic smile that would soon become the center of my universe. That was 3 years ago, when I was 73 and convinced my story had already been written, edited, and shelved. How spectacularly wrong I was. But let me back up a bit. Because you need to understand who I was before that September morning to truly appreciate what happened after. My name is Margaret, though everyone calls me Maggie. Now a change I made when I moved to the Palms senior community in Naples, Florida. Back in New York, I had been Margaret for 48 years of marriage to Harold, a wonderful man who left me too soon, when a heart attack stole him away at our breakfast table on an ordinary Tuesday morning. One moment he was reading about the Yankees' latest loss, the next he was gone. His coffee still steaming, his glasses sliding down his nose the way they always did when he dozed off. Except this time, he wasn't sleeping. The 18 months that followed were a blur of grief that felt like drowning in slow motion. Our 2 daughters, Sarah and Jennifer, tried their best to pull me back to the surface. They suggested grief counseling, which I attended dutifully every Wednesday at 2 o'clock. They invited me to stay with them, taking turns hosting me for weeks at a time. Sarah even cleared out her guest room permanently, painting it in the soft lavender she remembered I loved. But living in their spaces, watching their lives continue, while mine had stopped, only emphasized the Harold-shaped hole in my existence. It was Jennifer who first suggested Florida. She mentioned it casually during one of our Sunday video calls, talking about a client of hers, whose mother had moved to a senior community near Naples, and was apparently having the time of her life. I dismissed it immediately. Florida was where old people went to play shuffleboard and wait for the inevitable. I might have been 71 then. But I wasn't ready to be warehoused with the ancient and infirm. But the seed was planted, and as another brutal New York winter approached, the first I would face without Harold to complain to about the heating bills and laugh with about the neighbors' ridiculous inflatable Christmas decorations, I found myself scrolling through websites of Florida senior communities. Just research, I told myself. Just curiosity about how the other half lived. The Palms wasn't what I expected. The virtual tour showed vibrant people who looked nothing like my mental image of retirement home residents. They were kayaking in the Gulf, taking salsa lessons, attending wine tastings that looked more sophisticated than anything I'd been to in Manhattan. The residences were modern condos with ocean views, not the clinical rooms I'd imagined, and the activities calendar was so packed. I wondered when these people found time to be old. I flew down for a visit in February, telling my daughters I was just looking, not committing to anything. The moment I stepped off the plane into that warm, jasmine-scented air, something in my chest loosened. The sales director at the Palms, an energetic woman named Carmen, who was 75 herself and had abs I would have killed for at 30, showed me around with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved where she lived. The community was like a small town, designed for people who refused to act their age. There was a state-of-the-art fitness center, where a 90-year-old man was deadlifting weights that made me nervous just watching. The art studio had residents working on paintings that Carmen mentioned, sold for thousands at the annual gallery showing. The marina had everything from small sailboats to impressive yachts. And the restaurant they had 3 wouldn't have been out of place in Manhattan's Upper East Side. But it was the pickleball courts that caught my attention. 16 of them, arranged in neat rows, with palm trees providing shade between the sets. The morning I visited, every court was full, the air ringing with laughter and good-natured trash talk. Players ranged from what looked like early 60s to one spry woman who Carmen mentioned had just celebrated her 92nd birthday by winning the women's singles championship. Harold and I had never been particularly athletic. Our exercise consisted of walking to the corner deli and occasionally taking the stairs instead of the elevator. But watching those people play, seeing the joy on their faces, the way they high-fived after good shots and consoled each other after mistakes, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Harold died: curiosity about tomorrow. I signed the lease that afternoon. My daughters were shocked but supportive. Sarah flew down to help me move in that April, bringing boxes of things I couldn't bear to leave behind. Harold's coffee mug that I still couldn't bring myself to wash, our wedding album, the quilt his mother had made for our 10th anniversary. Jennifer handled the New York end, supervising the sale of our apartment, the distribution of furniture to family members, the 1,000 details that come with ending one life and starting another. My condo at the Palms was on the 3rd floor with a view of the Gulf that made me cry. The first time I saw the sunset from my balcony. 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, an open kitchen that flowed into a living room, with floor-to-ceiling windows. I arranged my furniture, the few pieces I'd kept, and hung our family photos. But it still felt like I was playing house in someone else's life. The first few weeks were harder than I'd anticipated. The other residents were welcoming but had established friendships and routines. I ate alone at the restaurant, reading books I couldn't focus on. I walked the beach at sunrise when it was empty, enough that I didn't have to smile and make small talk. I attended a few activities: a watercolor class, where I painted something that looked like a dying plant instead of the hibiscus. We were supposed to be creating a book club, where everyone seemed to have read different books than the one assigned. It was loneliness of a different flavor than what I'd experienced in New York. There, I had been surrounded by memories. Here, I was surrounded by life happening without me. I started to wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake, if I should have stayed in the grief that at least felt familiar. Then Carmen knocked on my door one morning in early September, about 5 months after I'd moved in. She was dressed in athletic wear that put my baggy t-shirt and worn shorts to shame, her silver hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look 60 instead of 75. She told me she'd noticed I hadn't signed up for any sports activities, and wondered if I'd like to try pickleball. I explained that I'd never played, had never played any racket sport, had in fact been picked last for every team sport in high school physical education, a trauma that still surfaced in occasional anxiety dreams. Carmen laughed and said that was perfect, because they needed fresh blood for the beginners clinic. She mentioned that everyone started as a beginner at something, and that the average age when people learned pickleball at the Palms was 74. I was ahead of the curve. I wanted to say no. I had a dozen excuses ready. But Harold's voice echoed in my head, the way he used to tease me about my reluctance to try new things. He'd been the adventurous one, always booking us tickets to shows I was sure I wouldn't like, in restaurants where I couldn't pronounce half the menu. And I'd usually ended up loving whatever he'd pushed me to try. So I said yes. The beginner's clinic was the next morning, at 8, before the Florida sun became unbearable. Carmen lent me a paddle and showed me the basic grip in my living room, demonstrating the motion for serving and returning. It looked simple enough. Basically ping pong standing up, she said, though she made me promise never to say that around the serious players. I hardly slept that night. At 73, I was nervous about attending what was essentially a sports lesson. Like I was back in junior high dreading gym class. I changed outfits 3 times before settling on the least embarrassing athletic wear. I owned black leggings that were really just thick tights and a moisture-wicking shirt Sarah had given me that still had the tags on. The morning was already warm when I walked to the courts. My borrowed paddle feeling alien in my hand. A group of about 8 people were gathered at court number 12. Most looking as uncertain as I felt. Carmen was there, along with a man she introduced as Tom Richardson. Who would be leading the clinic? That was him. That was the moment that would divide my life into before and after. Though I didn't know it yet. Tom Richardson stood about 6 feet tall, with the kind of posture that suggested a lifetime of standing at attention. His hair was completely silver, cut short in a style that probably hadn't changed in decades. He wore navy blue shorts and a white polo that revealed arms still corded with muscle. His face was weathered in that way of men who'd spent years in the sun, with deep lines around green eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He introduced himself to the group, mentioning briefly that he was a retired Navy colonel who'd discovered pickleball 5 years ago after his wife passed. The casual mention of his loss hit me unexpectedly. Here was someone else navigating the strange waters of life after death. The clinic started with basics: how to hold the paddle, where to stand, the rules that seemed arbitrary, but would make sense once we started playing. Tom was patient, demonstrating each technique multiple times, adjusting our grips with hands that were gentle despite their obvious strength. When he corrected my serve stance, standing behind me to guide my arm through the motion, I caught the scent of his aftershave. Something clean and traditional that reminded me of my father. We practiced serving for what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes. Then volleys, then the complicated scoring system that made tax forms look straightforward. Tom had a way of explaining things that made them stick. He used military analogies that should have gone over my head, but somehow made perfect sense. The kitchen, that 7-foot zone on either side of the net. Where you couldn't volley was the DMZ. Your paddle was your weapon, but your partner was your lifeline. Finally, he divided us into pairs for actual play. I was partnered with a woman named Dorothy who'd moved from Michigan and had the competitive gleam of someone who'd probably been a high school athlete 50 years ago. Tom said he and Carmen would play against different pairs, so we could get a feel for the game. When it was our turn to face them, my hands were shaking. Carmen served first, a gentle arc that Dorothy returned with surprising force. The ball came to Tom, who sent it back casually, almost lazily. Then it was coming at me, this neon yellow ball that seemed to be moving in slow motion and warp speed simultaneously. I swung and missed completely. Tom called out encouragement, something about keeping my eye on the ball till it hit my paddle. Carmen served again. This time I managed to make contact, sending the ball flying wildly over the fence behind them. Dorothy muttered something that might have been a curse word. We played, if you could call it that, for about 10 minutes. I missed more than I hit, and what I did hit rarely went where I intended. But Tom kept encouraging, kept feeding me easy shots I could sometimes return. Carmen was doing the same for Dorothy, and I realized they were basically playing catch with us while we flailed around in between. Then came the serve that changed everything. It was Tom's turn, and he'd been serving gentle, underhand lobs that even I could manage to return occasionally. But this time, maybe because he was talking to Carmen and not paying attention, or maybe because muscle memory kicked in, he served with actual force. The ball came at me like a targeted missile, spinning in a way that made it curve mysteriously in the air. I didn't even move, just stood there as it whooshed past my shoulder, so close. I felt the breeze it created. Dorothy laughed, not unkindly, and said something about Tom showing off. But Tom looked mortified. He immediately jogged around the net, apologizing profusely. He explained that he'd been thinking about something else, and reverted to his competitive serve, that it was completely inappropriate for a beginner's clinic. That he hoped he hadn't scared me off the game forever. His concern was so genuine. His green eyes so worried that I found myself laughing. Really laughing, for the first time in so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have joy bubble up from somewhere deep inside. I told him it was fine, that at least now I knew what I was working toward. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost boyish. He said that with dedication, I could have a serve like that in maybe 20 years. I replied that I'd settle for just getting it over the net consistently. He laughed, and something about the sound made my stomach do a little flip that I attributed to the heat. The clinic ended with Tom demonstrating various advanced techniques: the dink, the lob, the overhead smash that made the ball bounce so high off the court. It nearly cleared the fence. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of complete mastery. Every shot placed exactly where he wanted it. It was like watching a dancer who happened to be holding a paddle. As we were leaving, Tom approached me. He said he noticed I was new to the Palms, that he'd been here 3 years himself, and remembered how overwhelming it could be at first. He offered to give me some individual lessons if I was interested. Said he enjoyed teaching and it would give him something to do, other than beat the same guys he played every morning. I should have said no. Taking private lessons felt too much like something, but his offer seemed genuinely friendly, devoid of any undercurrent I might have worried about. And I needed something to structure my days around, something to work toward. So I said yes, we could try it once and see how it went. We agreed to meet the following Tuesday at 7 in the morning. Before the courts got crowded, I spent the intervening days watching YouTube videos about pickleball, trying to understand the strategy beyond just hitting the ball back. I even ordered my own paddle online. A mid-range model that the reviews said was good for beginners who were serious about improving. Tuesday morning arrived gray and humid, with the kind of thick air that promised afternoon thunderstorms. Tom was already at court 16 when I arrived, hitting balls against the practice wall with mechanical precision. He'd set up a basket of balls and some cones on the court, and I realized he'd actually prepared for our lesson like a real teacher would. We started with serving, him standing beside me and adjusting my stance, my grip, the angle of my paddle face. His corrections were specific but kind. He never said I was doing something wrong, just that I might try this small adjustment to see if it felt better. And usually, it did. After about 30 minutes of serving practice, during which I actually got most of them in the correct box, we moved on to returns. He stood at the net and hit gentle shots to me, calling out where he was aiming so I could prepare. Forehand, backhand, backhand, in a rhythm that became almost meditative. Then we played actual points, though played as generous. He basically fed me shots I could return while somehow making it seem like a real game. When I managed to win a point, usually because he'd hit it into the net or out of bounds on purpose, he'd celebrate like I'd just won Wimbledon. As we were cooling down, sitting on the bench between courts and drinking water that tasted better than champagne, after the workout, he asked about my story. What brought me to the Palms, where I was from, the polite getting to know you questions that could stay surface level or go deeper depending on the answers. I found myself telling him about Harold, about the breakfast table, about the grief that had felt like it might swallow me whole. He listened without interrupting, without offering platitudes about time, healing, or Harold being in a better place. When I finished, he simply said he understood. And something in his eyes told me he really did. He shared his own story then. His wife Linda had fought ovarian cancer for 3 years. and he'd retired from the Navy to care for her. They'd moved to Florida because she'd always dreamed of living near the ocean. She got 18 months of good days here before the cancer one. He'd stayed because leaving felt like abandoning her memory. And because the Palms had become home in a way he hadn't expected. We sat there as the courts filled up around us. Two people who'd lost our futures sitting in the humid Florida morning. Finding an unexpected comfort in shared grief. Finally, he asked if I'd like to make the lessons a regular thing. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, with the understanding that either of us could cancel anytime without explanation. I agreed, and that's how it started. Twice a week, 7 in the morning, court 16. He was always there first. Always prepared with some new drill or technique to work on. But more than the pickleball, we talked. During water breaks, while collecting balls. Walking back to our respective condos after the lesson. He told me about his 30 years in the Navy. The places he'd lived, the ships he'd commanded. Stories that should have been boring to someone who couldn't tell a destroyer from a submarine. But were fascinating when told in his quiet, thoughtful way. He talked about Linda, their 2 sons, who visited when they could but had their own complicated lives, the grandson he was teaching to sail. I told him about my life in New York. My years teaching high school English before the girls were born. Then the part-time tutoring I'd done once they were in school. About Harold's accounting firm. The vacation we'd taken to Italy for our 40th anniversary. The Sunday dinners that had been the cornerstone of our family life until everyone got too busy. The lessons were working. By the end of September, I could serve consistently, return most shots that came directly to me, and even occasionally execute a decent dink. Tom suggested I join the beginners round robin that played Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. It would be good to play with different people. He said, to get used to various styles. I was terrified, but I went. The group was welcoming, patient with my mistakes. Encouraging when I did something right. I was the worst player there, but nobody seemed to mind. They all had stories of their own beginning days. The balls they'd launched into parking lots, the times they'd completely whiffed on easy shots. But I kept my Tuesday and Thursday lessons with Tom. They'd become the highlight of my week. Something I looked forward to from the moment they ended. Not just the pickleball, though. I was genuinely starting to love the game, but the conversations. The comfortable silences, the way he'd become my first real friend at the Palms. October arrived with slightly cooler mornings and the snowbirds starting to return. The courts got more crowded. The restaurant fuller, the whole community buzzing with increased activity. Tom suggested we move our lessons to 6:30 to avoid the crowds. I agreed, though it meant setting an alarm for the first time since moving to Florida. One Thursday morning, after a particularly good lesson, where I'd managed to return several of his actual competitive serves, he mentioned the fall festival tournament coming up in November. It was a big deal at the Palms, with different skill divisions and age brackets. He thought I should enter the women's novice division, said I was ready. I laughed at first, thinking he was joking. But his expression was serious. He said competitions were the best way to improve, that having something to work toward would accelerate my learning. When I pointed out that I'd been playing for barely 2 months, he reminded me that everyone started somewhere, and that the novice division was specifically for people who'd been playing less than a year. I said I'd think about it, but privately thought there was no way I was ready to play in front of people. The round robins were one thing, everyone was just having fun. But a tournament sounded serious, official, potentially humiliating. The next week, during our Tuesday lesson, Tom brought it up again. But this time with a twist. He suggested we enter the mixed doubles novice division together. He qualified for it because he'd never played mixed doubles competitively. Some technicality in the rules. That seemed designed to let experienced players help newbies. He said it would be less pressure for me, that he could cover my weaknesses. While I learned how tournaments worked, the idea of playing with Tom as my partner changed everything. Not having to face the tournament alone, knowing he'd be there to help, made it seem possible. Still scary, but possible. I agreed, with the caveat that he couldn't get frustrated when I inevitably embarrassed us both. He said the only way I could embarrass him would be by not trying my best. Then he smiled, that smile that had become dangerously important to my daily happiness, and said we'd better increase our practice schedule if we were going to win this thing. I pointed out that not losing catastrophically would be victory enough for me. He said that was loser talk and he didn't train losers. So our twice-weekly lessons became 4 times a week, our regular Tuesday and Thursday lessons, plus practice matches on Monday and Wednesday afternoons. He recruited other mixed doubles teams for us to play against, couples, who were infinitely patient with my skill level and generous with advice. It was during one of these practice matches that I realized something had shifted between Tom and me. We were playing against Bob and Helen, a married couple who'd won several tournaments in higher divisions. They were taking it easy on us, but we were holding our own. Tom was covering about 70% of the court, but I was getting to balls I wouldn't have even seen a month earlier. Then Bob hit a perfect drop shot just over the net. I rushed forward, somehow got my paddle under it, and popped it up just high enough to clear the net. Helen, not expecting me to get there, was out of position. The point was ours. Tom let out a whoop of joy, grabbed me in a spontaneous hug, and spun me around right there on the court. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but in that moment, pressed against his chest, feeling his heart beating fast from exertion and excitement, something inside me woke up that I'd thought had died with Harold. I was attracted to this man, not just as a friend, not just as a pickleball partner, but in that butterflies in the stomach, weak in the knees way I hadn't felt in over 50 years. When he set me down, apologizing for getting carried away, I couldn't meet his eyes. I mumbled something about it being fine, that it was a good shot worth celebrating. But for the rest of the match, I was hyper-aware of him. The way he moved, the way he called out encouragement, the way his hand briefly touched my back when we switched sides. That night, I called Jennifer. I needed to talk to someone. And Sarah would have immediately started planning my wedding. Jennifer listened as I rambled about Tom, about the tournament, about the hug, and these unexpected, inconvenient, possibly ridiculous feelings. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said that Mom deserved to be happy, that Dad would want me to be happy, and that 73 was not too old to have butterflies. She also said that maybe I should see where this went before panicking about feelings that might be mutual. The thought that Tom might feel the same way hadn't occurred to me. I was just an old woman he was teaching pickleball to, helping out, because he was a nice person with time on his hands. The idea that he might see me as anything more seemed presumptuous. At best, delusional at worst. But over the next few days, I started noticing things. The way his face lit up when he saw me walking toward the courts. How he always saved my favorite flavor of sports drink in his cooler. The way our post-practice conversations stretched longer and longer, neither of us seeming to want to leave first. The week before the tournament, our practice intensified. Tom had us running drills for specific scenarios: how to handle lobs, how to defend against poaching, when to switch sides. He was patient but demanding, making me repeat shots until muscle memory took over. He said that in the heat of competition, we wouldn't have time to think, we'd have to trust our training. 3 days before the tournament, during our final practice session, disaster struck. I was backing up to get a lob, completely focused on the ball, when I stepped wrong on my right foot. The pain was immediate and sharp, shooting up from my ankle through my calf. I went down hard, my paddle flying one way, my dignity the other. Tom was beside me in seconds. His hands gentle but professional as he examined my ankle. Not broken, he determined, but definitely sprained. He helped me to the bench, got ice from the court's first aid station. Elevated my foot on his lap without asking permission. The intimacy of it, my foot in his hands. His fingers carefully probing for damage made me forget the pain momentarily. He insisted on taking me to urgent care, though I protested it wasn't necessary. The doctor confirmed Tom's diagnosis. A mild sprain that would need rest, ice, compression, and elevation. And absolutely no pickleball for at least a week. I was devastated. All that work, all that practice, and I'd ruined it with one clumsy step. Tom drove me home in his sensible Honda sedan. That smelled like sunscreen and coffee. He helped me up to my condo, settled me on the couch with my foot elevated, and then went to the pharmacy to fill the prescription for anti-inflammatories the doctor had given me. When he came back, he had not just the medication but bags of groceries. An ankle brace, a better ice pack than the bag of frozen peas I'd been using, and a stack of pickleball magazines to keep me entertained. He put the groceries away like he'd been in my kitchen 100 times, made me a sandwich I didn't ask for, but definitely needed, and sat in Harold's old recliner. The only piece of furniture I'd brought from New York besides our bed. I apologized for ruining our tournament chances. He looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. He said there would be other tournaments, that my health was what mattered, that he was just glad it wasn't worse. Then he mentioned, almost casually, that he'd been thinking about withdrawing anyway. Because he didn't want me to feel pressured. That maybe this was a sign we were pushing too hard too fast. I told him that was ridiculous, that I'd been looking forward to the tournament. More than I'd looked forward to anything in years. That playing with him had given me something to work toward, a reason to get up early. A purpose I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The words came out more honest and raw than I'd intended. He was quiet for a moment, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he said that teaching me, spending time with me, had been the highlight of his days too. That he'd started arriving at the courts earlier, just to have a few extra minutes before I got there to anticipate seeing me. That our conversations had made him realize how lonely he'd been, going through the motions of living without really being alive. We sat there in my living room, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, the air conditioner humming, the weight of unspoken words heavy between us. Finally, he said he should go, let me rest. But before he left, he leaned down and kissed my forehead, so gently. I might have imagined it except for the warmth that lingered after. He came by every day while my ankle healed. Bringing food, changing my ice pack, keeping me company. We watched old movies on TV, played cards, talked about everything and nothing. He told me about Linda's illness, how helpless he'd felt watching her fade away. I told him about the anger I'd felt at Harold for leaving me. Then the guilt about being angry at a dead man. By the 4th day, my ankle was better enough to walk on. Though Tom insisted I use the crutches he'd borrowed from the community center. We went to watch the tournament, sitting in the shade near court 1 where the mixed doubles matches were being held. Watching the teams play, I felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. I wasn't ready. I would have embarrassed both of us. But next time, I promised myself, next time I'd be ready. Tom was quieter than usual, and I worried that he was disappointed about missing the tournament. Despite what he'd said, but when I asked, he said he was trying to figure out how to say something without ruining our friendship. My heart sank. He was going to tell me he couldn't teach me anymore. That he'd met someone, that he was moving away. Instead, he said he had feelings for me that went beyond friendship. That he'd been trying to ignore them, to chalk them up to loneliness and proximity. But they kept getting stronger. He said he understood if I didn't feel the same way, if I wasn't ready for anything beyond friendship. If the idea of romance at our age seemed ridiculous. He just needed me to know, because keeping it inside was making him act weird. And he was afraid I'd notice. And think something was wrong with me when the problem was entirely his. I started laughing. Not at him, but at the situation. Here we were, two people in our 70s, sitting at a pickleball tournament. Having the kind of conversation I'd had at 16 about boys I liked. Tom looked hurt, started to apologize, but I stopped him. I told him I'd been having the same internal debate. That the hug on the court had awakened something I'd thought was dead. That I looked forward to our lessons not because I was passionate about pickleball. Though I'd grown to love the game. But because I was passionate about spending time with him. That I'd been terrified he saw me as just a charity case. An old woman he was being kind to out of pity. He took my hand then, right there in public. And said I was the most interesting, determined, beautiful woman he'd met in years. That teaching me had started as a way to pass time. But had become the reason he jumped out of bed every morning. That he'd been working up the courage to ask me to dinner for weeks. But kept chickening out because rejection at 79 might actually kill him. I squeezed his hand and said yes to the dinner. He hadn't actually asked me to yet. He laughed, that wonderful sound that had become my favorite music. And said in that case, would I have dinner with him that night? Somewhere nice. Not the community restaurant where everyone would watch and gossip. But a real restaurant where we could pretend to be on an actual date. That evening, he picked me up at 6:30, wearing khakis. And a button-down shirt that brought out the green in his eyes. I'd spent 2 hours getting ready, trying on every dress I'd brought from New York. Finally settling on a navy blue sundress that Jennifer had insisted I pack. Tom's expression when I opened the door told me I'd chosen correctly. He drove us to a seafood restaurant on the water in Old Naples. One of those places with white tablecloths and candles. And a wine list that required reading glasses to navigate. We were the youngest people there by at least 5 years. Which made us both laugh. The maitre d' seated us at a table overlooking the Gulf. Where the sunset was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. Conversation came easily, the way it always did with us. But there was a new undercurrent. Now, an awareness that this was something more than our usual post-practice talks. When the waiter asked if we were celebrating anything special, Tom said it was our first date. The waiter, who couldn't have been more than 25, smiled and said how nice it was to see love at any age. I expected to be embarrassed, but instead felt a warm glow of possibility. We talked about our marriages. How neither of us had expected to feel this way again. Tom said Linda would have liked me. Would have been glad he'd found someone who made him laugh. I admitted that Harold probably would have been jealous at first. He'd always been possessive in a gentle way. But ultimately would have wanted me to be happy. After dinner, we walked on the beach despite my still tender ankle. Tom held my hand to steady me, but didn't let go even when we reached firm sand. We walked slowly, in no hurry to end the evening, the waves lapping at our feet, the moon rising full and bright over the water. He asked me what I wanted, what I was looking for at this stage of life. I thought about it, really considered what I wanted, versus what I thought I should say. Finally, I told him I wanted companionship without losing my independence. I wanted someone to share adventures with. Even if those adventures were just trying new restaurants or entering pickleball tournaments. I wanted to feel alive again, not just like I was marking time. Tom said he wanted the same things. He'd been alone for 5 years, and while he'd learned to be comfortable with solitude, He missed having someone to share the small moments with. Someone to tell about the pelican he saw catch a fish that morning, someone to debate what to watch on TV. Someone who cared if he came home. We stopped walking, standing there in the moonlight like teenagers at the end of a date. Both wondering what came next. Tom touched my face, asked if he could kiss me properly this time. I said yes, and then his lips were on mine. Gentle and tentative at first, then with more confidence when I responded. It wasn't fireworks and symphonies. It was better. It was coming home after a long journey, it was finding something you didn't know you'd lost. It was recognition of a future you'd thought was behind you. When we pulled apart, both a little breathless. Tom said he was too old to take things slow if I was interested in seeing where this went. I told him I was too old to play games, so yes, I was very interested. The next few weeks were a delicious kind of chaos. We were suddenly that couple, the ones holding hands at breakfast, sharing a golf cart to the beach, dancing close at the community center's Saturday night social. The gossip mill at the Palms went into overdrive. Carmen winked at me every time she saw us together, taking full credit for introducing us even though technically Tom had been the instructor she'd assigned. My ankle healed completely, and we resumed our pickleball practice. Though now it included flirting that would have embarrassed my teenage grandchildren. Tom would stand closer than necessary to adjust my grip. I'd find excuses to touch his arm when celebrating good shots. And our water breaks involved a lot of gazing at each other like lovesick fools. The other residents were divided between finding us adorable and being slightly scandalized by our obvious affection. At our age, public displays of affection were apparently supposed to be limited to hand-holding at most. But Tom didn't care about propriety, and I found that I didn't either. We'd both spent too many years being appropriate, being careful, being what was expected. Now we just wanted to be happy. November turned into December, and Tom started spending more time at my condo than his own. We'd cook dinner together, watch the sunset from my balcony, fall asleep on the couch watching movies. It was domestic in a way that should have scared me. I'd only ever had that with Harold, but instead felt natural, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. One evening, while we were making spaghetti, Tom chopping vegetables with military precision, while I stirred the sauce. He mentioned that his son Michael was coming to visit for Christmas with his family. He seemed nervous as he asked if I'd like to meet them, have dinner together. Maybe play some pickleball if they were interested. Meeting the children. It was a big step, one that acknowledged this was serious. Not just two old people keeping each other company. I said yes, but admitted I was nervous. My own daughters had been supportive but cautious when I told them about Tom. Sarah had immediately looked him up online, finding his Navy service record and seeming impressed despite herself. Jennifer had asked probing questions about his intentions, protecting me like I was the child and she was the parent. Tom said Michael had been similarly protective, asking if I was after his money, which made Tom laugh since his Navy pension and modest savings hardly made him a catch financially. His younger son David, who lived in Seattle, had been more enthusiastic, just happy his father had found someone. I decided to invite my daughters for Christmas, too, figuring we might as well throw everyone together and see what happened. It would either be wonderful or a disaster. But at our age, we didn't have time to ease into things gradually. The week before Christmas, while we were practicing for another tournament, the New Year's Classic that we were determined to enter, Tom did something that stopped my heart. We were between games, drinking water and catching our breath, when he got down on one knee right there on court 16. For a horrible second, I thought he was having a heart attack, or his knee had given out. But then he pulled out a small velvet box, and I realized what was happening. The other players on nearby courts stopped to watch. And someone actually started recording with their phone. He said he knew it was fast, that we'd only been together 3 months. But that at our age 3 months was equivalent to 3 years in young people time. He said he loved me, that I'd brought light back into his life, that he didn't want to waste another day not being married to me if I'd have him. He said Linda had told him before she died not to be alone. To find someone who made him laugh. And that I was everything Linda would have wanted for him and more. The ring was simple and perfect, a solitaire diamond with smaller stones on the band. Not too big for active hands that needed to grip pickleball paddles. Later he told me he'd asked Jennifer for advice, calling her secretly to make sure he got something I'd like. I said yes before he even finished talking. Yes to marriage, yes to combining our lives, yes to whatever time we had left being spent together. The other players applauded, someone popped champagne. They'd apparently been saving in the court's refrigerator for a special occasion. And Carmen appeared from nowhere crying and saying she knew it from the first day she'd introduced us. Christmas with our combined families was controlled chaos. Tom's son Michael and his wife Karen were polite, but watchful, clearly protective of their father. Their teenage kids thought the whole thing was hilarious and sweet, immediately calling me Grandma Maggie and teaching me TikTok dances that made my new knees scream in protest. My daughters arrived the next day. Sarah with her husband Robert and their 2 boys, Jennifer alone. But armed with a list of questions that would have done a Senate confirmation hearing proud. The initial meeting was awkward, everyone sizing each other up, making small talk about flight delays and Florida weather. But Tom, wonderful Tom, had planned everything perfectly. He'd arranged a pickleball tournament. Kids versus adults, with modified rules to even the playing field. Nothing brings people together like shared competition and laughter. By the end of the day, Michael and Robert were planning a fishing trip. Sarah and Karen were exchanging recipes, and all the kids were in the pool together, plotting how to beat us at pickleball the next day. That evening, after everyone had gone to their hotels, Tom and I sat on my balcony watching the stars. He asked if I wanted a big wedding or something small. I laughed and said that at 73, I wasn't walking down any aisle in a white dress. But I did want our families there, our friends from the Palms. The people who'd become our community. We settled on a beach ceremony in February, giving us 2 months to plan and our family's time to arrange travel. Carmen, who it turned out was also an ordained minister because of course she would officiate. The reception would be at the Palms Community Center, with pickleball-themed decorations that Tom insisted on despite my protests that it was too cheesy. January flew by in a blur of planning and practice. We entered the New Year's Classic tournament, this time in the intermediate division because Tom insisted I was ready. We didn't win, but we made it to the semifinals, losing to a couple who'd been playing together for 10 years. It felt like a victory anyway. The week before the wedding, I got cold feet. Not about Tom, I was certain about him in a way. I'd only ever been certain about Harold. But about the magnitude of starting over at my age, about combining 2 full lives. With all their history and baggage. Tom found me crying on the beach at sunrise, having walked there in my pajamas and Harold's old cardigan that I still wore when I needed comfort. He didn't try to talk me out of my fears. Instead, he sat beside me in the sand and told me about his own doubts. How he sometimes felt guilty for being happy when Linda wasn't here to share it. How he worried he'd forget things about her as new memories replaced old ones. How he was terrified of losing me too, of going through that grief again. We sat there as the sun rose, 2 people who'd already had their forever loves, trying to figure out if you could have 2 forevers in one lifetime. Finally, Tom said that maybe we weren't supposed to compare this to what we'd had before. Maybe this was something entirely different, not better. Or worse than our first marriages, just different. A love that could only exist because of everything that came before it. The wedding day dawned perfect clear skies, warm. But not hot, with a gentle breeze off the Gulf. Sarah and Jennifer helped me get ready in my condo, zipping me into a pale blue dress that was elegant but not formal. Something I could wear again to nice dinners. They did my makeup and hair, fussing over me, like I was a bride in my 20s instead of my 70s. Jennifer gave me a small wrapped box, saying it was from both of them. Inside was a necklace, a silver chain with 2 charms. One was a tiny pickleball paddle. The other a heart with the date engraved on it. Sarah said they were proud of me. For choosing happiness, for being brave enough to love again. We all cried, carefully, so as not to ruin my mascara. The beach ceremony was small but perfect. Maybe 50 people, mostly from the Palms. But with our families in the front row. Tom's brother had flown in from California, my sister from Boston. Tom stood at the makeshift altar, an arch decorated with tropical flowers. In khakis and a white linen shirt, looking nervous and excited and perfect. Carmen performed the ceremony with just the right mix of humor and heart, talking about how pickleball had brought us together. But love had made us partners in more than just the game. Tom's vows made me cry. He promised to always be my doubles partner. On and off the court, to celebrate every point won and support me through every point lost. My vows were simpler but no less heartfelt. I promised to love him for whatever time we had, to make new memories while honoring old ones. To always try my best even when the score was against us. When Carmen pronounced us married and Tom kissed me, everyone cheered. Someone had brought pickleball paddles to bang together instead of clapping, which was ridiculous and perfect. We walked back down the beach as husband and wife. Our families and friends following, heading to the reception. That had somehow turned into the social event of the season at the Palms. The reception was exactly what we'd wanted. Casual, fun, with good food and better company. There was a pickleball cake that Tom had secretly ordered, complete with a miniature court on top with bride and groom figures holding paddles. The DJ played music from our era. And we danced to At Last, by Etta James, Tom singing along softly in my ear. Michael gave a toast that made everyone cry, talking about how his mother would have been so happy to see his father find love again. How I'd brought back the dad he remembered from before grief had dimmed his light. Sarah spoke about second chances, about how love doesn't have an expiration date, about how proud she was to see me choose joy. We didn't go on a honeymoon at our age. Every day in Florida felt like a vacation. Instead, we moved Tom's things into my condo, blending our lives in practical ways. His recliner next to mine, his coffee mug in my cabinet. His clothes in what had been the guest room closet. It should have been strange, this mixing of lives that had been separate for so long. But it felt natural, like it had always been meant to be this way. Our first tournament as a married couple was in March. We'd moved up to the intermediate advanced division, Tom insisting I was ready despite my protests. We were playing against couples who'd been partners for years, who had strategies and signals developed over countless games. But we had something else. A connection that went beyond hand signals and predetermined plays. Tom knew exactly where I'd be on the court, could sense when I was going to poach. When I needed him to take a shot I couldn't reach. We played like we'd been partners forever. Which in a way, we had been, just waiting to find each other. We won our first match easily, the second with more difficulty. By the quarterfinals we were facing real competition, a couple from the villages, who'd won multiple gold medals in senior games. They were technically better than us. Their shots more precise, their strategy more sophisticated. But we had heart. And in the third game, when the score was tied at 10-10, win by 2, something magical happened. Every shot found its mark, every return was perfect. Every serve exactly where we wanted it. We won 15-13, both of us crying and laughing as we hugged at the net. We lost in the semifinals to the eventual champions, but it didn't matter. We'd proven something to ourselves, that we were truly partners. That together we were better than the sum of our parts. That night, as we sat on our balcony, it was ours now. Not mine. Tom said he had never been happier. Not even in his first marriage. Not even when his boys were born, had he felt this particular kind of joy. It was happiness informed by loss. Made richer by the knowledge of how precious and fragile it was. I understood what he meant. This love we'd found was different from young love, different. Even from the mature love I'd had with Harold. This was love with eyes wide open, love that knew about morning medications and afternoon naps. Love that celebrated small victories because we knew how quickly everything could change. Spring turned to summer, and we developed routines that felt both new and timeless. Pickleball 4 mornings a week, breakfast at the beach cafe on Sundays. Grocery shopping together on Wednesdays. Because Tom insisted it was more fun with company. We joined a couples book club, took a painting class where we were equally terrible. Learned to play mahjong from a group of ladies who'd been playing together for 20 years. In July, Tom had a health scare, chest pains that turned out to be acid reflux. But not before we'd spent 6 hours in the emergency room. Me holding his hand and trying not to show how terrified I was. It was a reminder that our time was limited, that every day was a gift we shouldn't take for granted. We started traveling a little, nothing exotic. Just driving trips around Florida. We visited the Keys, spent a long weekend in St. Augustine, drove to Orlando to see Tom's newest grandchild. Each trip was an adventure. Even when things went wrong, especially when things went wrong. Our 1-year wedding anniversary approached, and Tom started acting suspicious. Secret phone calls, packages he'd hide when I came into the room. Consultations with Carmen that would stop abruptly when I appeared. I tried not to pry, but curiosity was killing me. The morning of our anniversary, he woke me at dawn, insisting we had to get to the courts early. I protested that nobody played pickleball on anniversary mornings. But he was adamant. When we arrived at court 16, our court, it was decorated with white ribbons and flowers. All our pickleball friends were there, forming a tunnel of raised paddles for us to walk through. At the net was a banner, "Still partners, still champions, still in love." Carmen was there with renewal of vows she'd prepared. And Tom had arranged for us to replay our wedding ceremony right there on the court where we'd met. It was absolutely ridiculous and absolutely perfect. But the real surprise came after. Tom had entered us in a special anniversary tournament he'd created not just for us, but for all the couples at the Palms who'd found love later in life. There were 8 couples competing, ages ranging from mid-60s to late 80s. The winners would get their names on a plaque in the community center. But more importantly, would get bragging rights for an entire year. We played our hearts out. In the finals, we faced Bob and Helen again. The couple we'd practiced against when I first started. They were better than us technically. But we had improved so much, and we had the crowd on our side. Everyone was cheering for the anniversary couple. The romance that had given everyone hope that love was possible at any age. The match went to 3 games. In the final game, with the score 14-14, Tom served one of his impossible serves. The kind that had startled me that first day at the beginner's clinic. Bob managed to return it, but weakly. I was there at the net, paddle ready. And I put it away with an overhead smash I couldn't have imagined executing 2 years ago. We won. We actually won. Tom lifted me up right there on the court. spinning me around like we were young lovers instead of septuagenarians with joint problems. The crowd went wild, and someone started playing "We Are the Champions" on their phone connected to a Bluetooth speaker. That night, at the anniversary dinner, Tom had also secretly arranged, he gave another speech. He talked about second chances, about how pickleball had brought us together. But love had made us family. He thanked our children for accepting us, our friends for supporting us, and me for taking a chance on a old Navy guy who talked too much about strategy and not enough about feelings. When it was my turn to speak, I talked about the courage it takes to love again after loss. The gift of finding someone who understands that you can honor the past while embracing the future. I thanked Harold and Linda for teaching us how to love, because without them, we wouldn't have known how to love each other. Year 2 brought new challenges. Tom's arthritis got worse, making those early morning games harder. I developed a tennis elbow, pickleball elbow, really. That required physical therapy and a break from playing. We adapted, as older couples do. On days when Tom couldn't play, he coached from the sidelines. When I couldn't play, I became the official scorekeeper and chief cheerleader. We started mentoring new couples at the Palms, teaching beginners clinics together. Tom handled the technical instruction while I provided the encouragement and proof that anyone could learn this game. We became known as the pickleball matchmakers, taking credit for at least 3 romances that bloomed on our courts. My grandchildren visited for spring break, and Tom taught them all to play. Watching him patiently show my 8-year-old grandson how to serve. Seeing the joy on both their faces when the ball cleared the net. I fell in love with him all over again. This was a different Tom than the competitive player I'd met. This was a grandfather figure who happened to have married into the role but embraced it completely. In September, approaching the 3-year anniversary of when we met, Tom suggested we enter one more tournament, the senior mixed doubles at the Florida State Games. It was a bigger deal than our local tournaments. With teams from all over the state, we'd be competing against people who'd been playing for decades, former tennis players, even some former professionals who'd switched to pickleball. I thought he was crazy, but his enthusiasm was infectious. We started training like we were preparing for the Olympics. Diet changes, extra practice, strategy sessions, where we watched YouTube videos of professional matches. Tom created a playbook of our opponents, studying their weaknesses like he was planning a military campaign. The tournament was in Orlando, a 3-day event with hundreds of participants. Our children came to watch, bringing homemade signs and embarrassing T-shirts with our faces on them. We were seated last in our bracket. The underdogs. Nobody expected to advance past the first round. But we'd learned something in our 3 years together. We played better when nobody expected anything from us. We won our first match in straight games, shocking ourselves more than our opponents. The second match was harder, going to 3 games. But we pulled it out with determination and a little luck. By the 3rd day, we'd made it to the medal rounds. Bronze was guaranteed if we could win one more match. We were playing a couple from Miami who'd won gold the previous year. They were younger, late 60s, and clearly superior players. But Tom had noticed something watching them play. They didn't communicate well, often both going for the same ball or leaving gaps between them. We exploited those gaps mercilessly. Every shot aimed at the space between them, making them decide who would take it. They started arguing with each other. Just little frustrations, but enough to throw off their rhythm. We won the first game 11-9. The second game, they adjusted, playing better, communicating more. They destroyed us 11-3. In the 3rd game, Tom pulled me aside during a timeout. He said he was proud of me no matter what happened, that making it this far was already a victory. But that he thought we had one more surprise in us. The final game was the best pickleball we'd ever played. Every shot was intentional, every movement synchronized. It was like dancing, like we were connected by an invisible string. The score went back and forth 5-5, 8-8, 10-10. At 10-10, Tom whispered that he loved me, then served an ace that landed just inside the baseline. Their return went into the net. We'd won bronze at the Florida State Games. The medal ceremony was one of the proudest moments of my life. Standing on that podium, bronze medals around our necks, our families cheering, I thought about the journey from that first beginner's clinic to here. Tom held my hand as they played the national anthem, and I could feel him trembling not from age or fatigue, but from emotion. That night, at the celebration dinner, our kids surprised us with a video they'd been secretly making. They'd interviewed people at the Palms, gathering stories about us. Carmen talked about knowing we were meant for each other from the start. Bob and Helen joked about us being their toughest competition. Despite being the oldest, the beginners we'd taught talked about how we'd inspired them, not just in pickleball but in life. The video ended with a message from Tom's son David, who couldn't be there in person. He said that seeing his father find love again had taught him that life doesn't end at any particular age, that there's always room for new chapters, new adventures, new love. He thanked me for bringing his dad back to life. We're in our 4th year now. Tom is 82, I'm 76. We still play pickleball 4 mornings a week, though we've dropped back to the recreational division where winning matters less than laughing. We still give lessons, still mentor new couples, still act as proof that it's never too late to fall in love. Some mornings are harder than others. Tom's arthritis means he needs help opening pickle jars. Ironic, given our sport of choice. My knees predict rain better than any meteorologist. We take more medications than we'd like, nap more than we used to, forget why we walked into rooms. But we're together. We wake up each morning grateful for another day. Another game, another chance to annoy our opponents with our ridiculously happy marriage. We've become that couple everyone at the Palms knows, the ones who still hold hands at dinner, who still flirt during water breaks, who still look at each other like teenagers with crushes. Last week, a new widow moved into the Palms. She looked exactly like I had 4 years ago. Lost, grief-stricken, going through the motions. Carmen brought her to the courts, introduced her around. She said she'd never played any sports, that she was too old to start. Now, that she just wanted to be left alone. Tom and I exchanged glances. We'd heard this before. We invited her to watch us play, promised we wouldn't pressure her to try. She sat on the bench, arms crossed, clearly there only because Carmen wouldn't leave her alone. But by the end of our game, I saw something I recognized, a tiny spark of curiosity. After the game, Tom sat beside her while I got us all water. He didn't talk about pickleball. He talked about loss, about the weight of empty spaces, about how the Palms had saved him. When he thought he had nothing left to live for, he told her our story, how pickleball had been the excuse, but connection had been the cure. She came back the next day. And the next. Yesterday, she held a paddle for the first time. Tom adjusting her grip with the same patience he'd shown me. She hit the ball over the net on her 5th try and smiled, really smiled. For the first time since arriving at the Palms, Tom caught my eye over her head and winked. Another beginning, another chance for someone to discover that life doesn't end with loss, it just changes shape. We've become the elders here, the ones who show others it's possible. The living proof that love and joy and purpose can bloom at any age. Tonight, as I finish telling you this story, Tom is on our balcony, setting up his telescope. He's recently decided we should learn astronomy. Says it's never too late to reach for the stars. He's probably right. He usually is about these things. In a few minutes, I'll join him, and we'll look at constellations. We're just learning to name, holding hands like the old romantics we've become. People sometimes ask us what our secret is. How we found love again when we thought that part of our lives was over. The truth is, there's no secret. We just showed up. We tried something new. We were open to possibility even when possibility seemed impossible. And most importantly, we chose courage over comfort. Connection over isolation, love over fear. Tom likes to say that pickleball saved his life, but that's not quite right. Pickleball was just the vehicle. The real salvation was in the reaching out, the trying again. The belief that even at 73 and 79, even after tremendous loss, even when your knees hurt and your serve is weak, you can still find your perfect doubles partner. So if you're listening to this and thinking, you're too old, too sad, too set in your ways to try something new or open your heart again, let me tell you what Tom told me that first day at the beginner's clinic. Everyone starts somewhere, and it's never too late to begin. The score is love, love, the game is just beginning, and your partner is out there, waiting for you to pick up your paddle and play.